Chapter 18. Pat Stevens' reaction to his stocky friend's surprise announcement was exactly the opposite of what Sam had been expecting. "Just Denton's here, you say? And Big Medicine? That's just fine." His smile was benign. "At least we know Della won't be annoyed when we're all up here ourselves. I'd sure like to have a talk with her, though," he mused. Sam glowered at him, astonished. "You aren't sticking your head back in that bear trap down there at Avalanche?" he demanded, aghast. "Oh, I don't know. I gotta be going back sometime," Pat pointed out, seemingly unworried by the danger he must run into on the return. As it turned out, his opportunity for making the trip came earlier than he had looked for. Shortly after supper that night, Roy Spain sought him out, coming across him in one of the supply stores where Pat was engaged in buying cartridges, a new belt, and a few other odds and ends which he had stood in need of. "You're hard to find, Stevens, in a camp as small as this one," the young fellow said. "Where can we have us a talk?" They moved outside to follow, for a few rods, a dim and deserted trail running up into the firs surrounding the camp. "What's your trouble?" Pat broke the silence. Spain faced him frankly. "I have a problem, Pat. You know, of course, that I hired a stage guard to replace you when you decided to stay here. He rode down here with me last night. This morning he refused to make the up trip. I hadn't time to find another man, and just tonight Harv Wright informed me he'll have an express shipment of concentrate to go out on a stage tomorrow." Pat knew that while the silver ore from this camp was hauled out by multi-team freight rigs, the gold concentrate commonly was shipped via stage under heavy guard. "So, you're stuck with a payload and no guard to cover the movement, huh?" He nodded. "I could maybe pick up another man here tonight," added Spain, "but I don't know if I could trust him. For that matter, I might easily get through alone without any trouble, but—" "I know," Pat assented. "It's taking a mighty big risk, and why run the risk? No need of that. I'll go down with you," he offered simply. "Well, goodness!" Roy showed some embarrassment. "That would mean sticking your own neck out just at this time. I thought maybe one of your friends, maybe?" "No," Pat was decided. "Sam or Ezra would go in a flash, but I want to go down there anyways. Don't worry about it." He was on hand early the following morning when Spain rolled the stage up in front of the hotel. The gold concentrate had been loaded earlier for security reasons in the comparable safe privacy of the livery barn. Two iron-bound lock boxes, which now reposed in the boot covered by a tarp. A shrewd eye might have discerned the manner in which the coach sagged into its braces under the added weight, but no one appeared interested this morning, not so much as a single passenger being on hand, a circumstance which might have been accidental. They were soon under way, and the team trotted briskly, the brakes grinding from time to time on some steep descent. Spread rosy dawn gave promise of a fine day, the whiskey jacks screeching in the pines. Pat was enjoying himself on the box, rifle laid across his knees, and the air was crisp and sparkling. The rough trail wound around the wooden shoulders of ridge and spur, affording occasional broad glimpses down over the long league slants of lustrous evergreens, stretching away for uninhabited miles. Deer bolted away through the forest aisles, grappling with slanting sunlight. Rabbits bound out of their way. Except for this wildlife and themselves, these hills appeared deserted. Toward mid-morning they passed a string of 6 and 8 team drags toiling upward, the bearded freighters waving. Spain whipped the stage horses up again into a run, keeping an alert watch forward and back. "Well, no trouble today, I guess," he tossed Pat finally, above the rumbling clatter of rapidly spinning wheels. You never know, boy. Things can happen pretty quick sometimes. But Pat's answering smile was lazy. When it did come, trouble arrived from a totally unexpected direction. They were bowled down a long, easy grade, skirting a naked rock and gravel slate rising on their right to the height of several thousand yards. So long was that rugged, ugly scar of some ancient landslide that the tall pines graced its high crest were dwarfed to the size of matchsticks. Ledges and outcrops broke in its surface, and altogether it bore a forbidding aspect. Suddenly, as they rolled along, Pat gave vent to a yell. "Watch it, Spain!" He was on his knees in a twinkling. "There's a loose rock that's coming springing at us." It was true. So swiftly did the flying missile advance that Roy had time for no more than a single startled glance. A boulder of perhaps a half a ton weight or better, it appeared to be rushing directly towards them, bounding and sailing through the air at terrific speed. Spain went into action instantly. His long black snake withered out. The horses plunged forward, leapt into their collars, and the stage lurched ahead. It was too late. With a jangling crash of smashing slate, the boulder struck the ground a dozen yards above them and hurtled down like a giant sledge, striking the vehicle a staggering blow which made it shudder. Next instant, the rear of the coach slanted down on one side and dragged heavy. Almost thrown off the roof by the shock of the collision, Pat hung on somehow, even managing to save his rifle. By the time Spain had managed to seesaw the horses to a halt, a couple 100 yards further down the trail, it was clearly apparent that grave damage had been done. Roy tied the reins into a disgusted and slightly shaken silence. They climbed down and soberly examined the smashed rear wheel, so effectively twisted into kindling that it would never be of use again. "I reckon we're darned lucky it's not worse," remarked Pat at length. "You thought pretty quick, Roy. There was no ducking that rock altogether, but as it was, we still got the stage left, and we might be able to rig up a drag. If it had been a front wheel or even the horses, we'd be stopped dead." "Yeah, maybe we can figure something out." But Spain's mind was not on his words. Pat got what he was thinking. This stretch of trail on which they were stranded, and the surrounding slopes, appeared entirely deserted except for themselves. He pointed that fact out dryly. "There's been slides here before," he reminded moderately. "That rock could have been pure accident." "I know," Spain frowned, "but I don't like it, Stevens, coming in just that way. We're in the wide open here, laying with a busted wheel." "Could be," Pat allowed with grim reserve. "I'll dispute the question at long range with anyone who thinks so." Under his direction, Roy took the hand axe and climbed down to haul out a stout sapling that was some 15 feet in length. He dragged it back up the raw slope. By dint of much grunting and effort, they propped up the stage and ripped away the remaining fragments of the broken wheel and rigged the springy timber so as to act as a supporting drag, lashing it securely to the undercarriage by means of straps and rope lengths. From time to time as they worked, Pat paused to glance about sharply. They were not disturbed, and except for a ragged outcrop jutting beside the trail a dozen rods below their position, the way lay empty and open to their sight for half a mile. Pat gave the completed drag a final narrow scrutiny and straightened. "Okay, Roy, let's climb aboard and we'll try her. I'll stay out here for a while and watch." Spain crawled up on the box and started off slowly. The drag cut a furrow in the trail. The coach jarred and rumbled, protested this inconvenient means of support, but apparently the makeshift arrangement was going to work. Pat was still striding alongside the rear as they passed by the granite outcropping that was raised above the trail, and suddenly a harsh voice spoke from overhead. "Okay, smart boy," it said. "Let the rifle drop." A swift upward glance revealed only a small segment of brown mopped forehead over the edge of a rock, a a single flinty eye and the menacing muzzle of a gun trained squarely upon him. Pat halted, let the Winchester slide from his grasp to thud in the dust. On the instant, a second mounted man jumped his horse out from behind the base of the rock to cover Spain. "Haul up," he sang out harshly. "Tie them lines and now climb down and get back there with the other hombre." His face a thundercloud, Roy joined Pat in the trail, scarcely able to control his anger. "Fine now, just hold that poise," the man on the rock called down. "We won't keep you much more'n a minute or two." The bandit on the horse, which Pat had already scanned closely for future reference, slipped to the ground and clambered up into the boot. "It's here," he called out gruffly, and he tumbled the tarp cover aside. "Shut up and heave her down," snapped the man overhead, never removing his beady gaze from Pat or Spain. There was a thud as the box of gold concentrate struck the ground heavily, almost splitting open. The second followed, and the nimble hold-up man slid down and ran out of sight and came back holding a pair of patient pack mules. It was all he could do to heave the boxes up one at a time, and the mules they grunted. He secured them with a swift and practiced diamond hitch. Watching this cool appropriation, Spain started to break into a wrathful explanation, and Pat swiftly nudged him to silence. The man on the rock rose, lanky and lantern-jaw. "All right, put a gun on them two," he growled, "whilst I get down there." The other complied, glaring as if he preferred to blast Pat and Roy down. The lanky one puffed into sight at the base of the ledge. Walking forward, he reached carefully down and picked up Pat's rifle, and he handed it to his companion, who methodically smashed the gun over a wheel and then tossed the wreck aside. "That young feller," growled the lanky owl hoot. "Get his cutter." Pat, for a wonder, was not now wearing his Colt. The outlaw yanked Spain's weapon from its holster and backed away. "Reckon that draws out their fangs," said the second bandit callously. "Let's get out of here." They backed their horses and swung astride. One of them started the laden pack mules into motion. The lanky one surveyed Pat and Roy for a second, in doubt. "You look sensible," he rasped. "Just prove it by staying right where you are for 10 minutes. And from the looks of the stage, you won't have no luck following us anyway." The remark dispelled any lingering doubt they might have held concerning the source of the falling rock, which had touched off a swift chain of events. They said nothing, and the outlaw swung his bronc around and started after his confederate, and glancing back sharply. Spain was the first to break silence. Once the robbers had drawn out of earshot. "Damn them!" Roy burst out then. "If they had left us a gun, I'd never take this laying down." He started wrathfully to circle round the stage. "Hold it, boy," Pat rapped out curtly. "Don't get restless. Just let them pull out of sight first." The bandits jogged down the trail with a galling deliberation, driving the pack mules till they reached the edge of the forest, and here they turned off into the trees, and a moment later the green shadows engulfed them. Only making sure they were gone, Pat sprang into instant action. "Rip one of them horses out of the harnesses," he flung at the surprised Spain. At the same time he ran to the stage, scrambled swiftly up onto the box, and a moment later climbed down carrying his wrapped-up cartridge belt and six-gun. Spain stared open-mouthed. "Hang it, Stevens, you're a cute one," he exclaimed violently. "I never seen you stash that gun under the seat." "Get moving," retorted Pat grimly, "and stow the gabbin'." Spain had a stage horse out of traces in record time. He was starting to free a second one when Pat halted him. "Let it go, Roy," he ordered tensely. "You stay with the outfit." "Hell I will, Stevens. I'm responsible for that gold that hombres are packing away." Pat lifted a hand. "Forget it, kid. I'm taking this trail alone." He swiftly fashioned a rein about the available straps, and since a saddle was out of the question, sprang aside the bareback. The horse bucked into a lively fashion, but soon straightened out into a headlong run, and Spain stood watching him scamper down the trail. A few minutes later, Pat was crashing through the pines in a young spruce on the trail of the bandits. There was little difficulty about the course they had taken, the hoofs of the pack animals leaving clear imprints in the soft soil. Pat worked up a long, rugged slope and slowed as he neared the top. The growth up here was dense, forcing him to choose his way with care. A few minutes later, he halted at the lofty edge of the steep-walled canyon. Keeping a tight rein, he sat silent with strained ears, and after a long time a faint crash came up to him from below. It was the hold-up men, crashing away through heavy brush. No one could have told the direction they were taking, but looking over the wide gulf, Pat deemed they'd be working downward toward the open valleys, with flight where it would be easier. Turning his horse, he rode as swiftly as possible along the canyon edge till, 20 minutes later, he came upon a side vent that led down into the depth. It appeared impossible to navigate, but that didn't deter him. Into the gap he turned the willing horse and went sliding down recklessly, the plunky animal under him all but sitting on its heels. Loose soil started to roll and rattle, and he tore out bushes of roots and created a racket which seemed inevitable would give him away. But despite a 6-foot jump which the horse took without pause, he arrived within 5 minutes at the bottom, hundreds of feet down below in safety. Now Pat sent the horse racing towards the open. Bursting out of the side canyon, he saw the bandits 100 yards away, whipping the laboring pack mules into a run in their endeavor to escape. A rifle cracked and the slug went flying wild, but Pat knew that the long-range weapon could defeat him in a pinch. Ignoring the thieves, he whipped out his Colt and lined up his sights on the bobbing mules. At his second try, one of them lurched and went head over heels. Pat clenched his teeth at that sight, but it was the only way. The owl hoots whirled, leveling a hot fire at him as they stood at bay, and like an Indian, he set his whooping course diagonally forward, presenting a difficult and almost impossible target. Even so, a slug creamed off the rowel of his spur, twisted his leg, and Pat threw down onto the marksman as he levered a fresh shell into the firing chamber. At the first shot, the outlaw threw up an arm and reeled in the saddle, and the other rushed towards him. Before he covered a yard, the wounded man had slipped to the ground. His horse pranced away. His rattled companion started to dismount and calling out hoarsely. Pat's last shot burned his pony's neck and almost threw him. Certainly it altered his intentions, and wheeling the horse, abandoning the loot altogether, the outlaw raced wildly away into an undisguised flight. It gave Pat a moment in which to thumb a fresh load into his hot gun, and that done he leaned over and picked up the wounded outlaw's carbine. A single shot was all he had managed before the fleeing owl hoot vanished from sight up the canyon. Pat covered the second mule with its valuable load and jogged soberly back behind the animal. "Wonder if that hombre's still able to talk," he thought to himself. He stepped down, rolled the wounded man over onto his back. A word or two issued from between the blue lips. Pat knelt down. He was still there, tight of face, when Roy Spain jogged forward 20 minutes later. Roy's incredulous eyes swept the laden mules and turned to Pat. He had already noted the prone bandit. "He still alive?" he queried tightly. "No, he's gone." "Good," Spain grunted. "Nothing to prevent us from getting that gold back to the stage." Pat's resolve appeared fixed. "We'll cache the stuff in the rocks to be picked up later. I had to drop one of the mules anyways. No, Spain, I'm heading straight back to Big Medicine, and I ain't got no time to lose about it." Roy stared. "But hell, Stevens, that's a thundering long ways out of our way." "No, it ain't. This owl hoot's gone now, but he talked before he went. I got the gold back. I didn't do it for Hunter or his stage company, and it's a good thing I didn't. Vern rigged this setup himself to smash you, all on account of Della." Spain went deathly white at this, but his tone was slow. "I don't get it, Pat. Just why would that be?" he demanded. "Hunter don't believe either one of us. That's why. He still thinks you brought the girl to Montana for reasons of your own, and he's getting even." Roy turned towards his mount, his young face set in grim lines. "Seems then our first chore is to get up there and shove this under his rotten nose. What are we waiting for?" End of chapter 18.